Have you ever found yourself in a situation where each person around you could be either an ally or an enemy? How would you distinguish truth from lies when everyone has something to hide? Buckingham Palace, once a setting of elegance and grandeur, now felt like a labyrinth of suspicions and secrets. James Harford, the chief butler, moved through the ornate corridors with silent determination, his steps muted by luxurious Persian carpets. "Mr. Harford," a voice echoed down the hallway, making Jai. It was Eleanor, a young maid with bright eyes and brown hair pinned up in an immaculate bun. She approached him quickly, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "What is it, Eleanor?" James asked, noting the anxiety on her face. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, fiddling with the hem of her apron. I saw something, sir, just before the confusion started." James gently led her to a more discreet corner, away from the curious ears of the other staff passing by. "Tell me everything, Eleanor. Every detail might be important." The young woman took a deep breath before beginning. "I was tidying one of the guest rooms in the West Wing, the one near the room where Lady Vivian was getting ready. Suddenly, I saw a figure pass quickly. They were wearing the palace staff uniform, but—" She paused, biting her lower lip. "But," James prompted, his grey eyes fixed on her. "There was something different. A brooch. It wasn't like the ones we usually wear. It was a golden eagle, I think. It shone in the candlelight." James felt a chill run down his spine. The golden eagle was the symbol of the old Hughes family, a line of servants who had served the crown for generations. His mind immediately evoked the image of Henry Hughes, an old friend and fellow butler, known for his discretion and unwavering loyalty. "Are you certain of this, Eleanor?" James asked, his voice low and intense. The young woman nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, sir. I thought it odd at the time, but with all the fuss of the party, I forgot about it until now." James placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "You did well to tell me. Please don't mention this to anyone else for now." As Eleanor walked away, James leaned against the cold stone wall, his mind a whirl of thoughts. Henry Hughes, his mentor and longtime friend, possibly involved in the Sapphire's disappearance. The idea seemed absurd, but James knew that in a place like Buckingham Palace, appearances often deceived. Determined to learn more, James made his way to the palace's records office. The room was a maze of high shelves full of leather-bound books and yellowed documents. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air. With agile fingers, James scanned the archives until he found what he was looking for: records of the Hughes family. As he read, his brow furrowed deeper and deeper. The family's history was marked by loyal service, but also by moments of controversy and rumors of hidden secrets. One paragraph in particular caught his attention. 1892, unresolved incident involving a crown jewel. Hughes exonerated due to lack of evidence, but doubts remain. James closed the book with a heavy sigh. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed was disturbing. Leaving the records office, James almost collided with a figure moving quickly down the hallway. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized Henry Hughes. "James!" Hughes exclaimed, a tense smile on his wrinkled face. "What a surprise to find you here at this hour." James studied his old friend's face, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness. "Henry, good to see you. I'm investigating the incident from tonight. You haven't seen or heard anything unusual, have you?" For a brief moment, James saw something pass over Hughes' eyes. Fear, guilt. Before the smile returned, even more forced. "No, nothing out of the ordinary. But you know how these parties are, always full of surprises." James nodded slowly. "Yes, indeed. Well, if you remember anything, please let me know immediately." As he walked away, James couldn't help but notice the golden glint on Hughes's lapel. An eagle, almost imperceptible in the corridor's dim light. Back in his small office, James sank heavily into his chair, his mind filled with unanswered questions. Loyalty to a longtime friend clashed with his duty to the crown. What secrets did the Hughes family hold, and how far would James be willing to go to uncover the truth? The clock on the wall marked the relentless passing of time, reminding James that time was running out. The sapphire was still missing, and with it, secrets that could shake the very foundations of the palace. As the night wore on, James wondered, who could he really trust? And what price would he have to pay for the truth? What would you do in James's place? Would you confront your old friend directly, or continue investigating in the shadows? The answers, James knew, could change everything and everyone forever. Have you ever wondered how the secrets of the past might shape the present? How a single decision made decades ago could trigger a chain of events affecting generations? Morning arrived at Buckingham Palace, bringing with it a fine mist that enveloped the gardens in an ethereal shroud. James Harford watched from his office window, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of concentration. The sleepless night had left marks under his eyes, but his posture remained as impeccable as ever. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning to see Eleanor enter the room timidly. "Mr. Harford," she began hesitantly, I remembered something else about last night." James gestured for her to sit. "Please, Eleanor, tell me everything." The young maid settled into the chair, nervously twisting her hands in her lap. "Well, sir, it's not exactly about last night, but something I heard a few weeks ago. Lady Vivian was talking with one of her friends in the garden. I didn't mean to listen, but sometimes we hear things unintentionally," James reassured her. "What did they say?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "Lady Vivian mentioned something about a curse. She said the sapphire brought bad luck to whoever possessed it. She seemed frightened, sir." James frowned, a distant memory surfacing in his mind. "A curse, you say? Interesting. Thank you, Eleanor. This may be more important than you realize." After Eleanor left, James made his way to a rarely visited part of the palace, the old library. The smell of ancient books and worn leather greeted him as he opened the heavy oak door. Moving among the dusty shelves, James searched for a specific volume, the royal diaries of the 19th century. His fingers slid along the spines until he found what he was looking for. Sitting at a reading table, James carefully opened the diary. The yellowed pages creaked under his fingers as he leafed through, searching for any mention of the Sapphire or the Hughes family. Finally, his eyes caught something. May 15th, 1892. The incident with the Clarence Sapphire was resolved, but at what cost? Hughes swore revenge. "I fear this curse will haunt our family for generations." James felt a shiver run down his spine. The Clarence Sapphire. Could it be the same jewel that now adorned Lady Vivian's neck? As he continued reading, James discovered more details about the incident. Apparently, the sapphire had originally been owned by the Hughes family, but was confiscated by the Crown on charges of treason. The Hughes patriarch of the time swore that the jewel would bring misfortune to any member of the royal family who possessed it. While James absorbed this information, the library door creaked open. He looked up, surprised to see Henry Hughes standing at the entrance. "Ah, James," Hughes said, his tone casual but with tension in his eyes. "I didn't expect to find you here." James closed the diary carefully. "Henry, I'm just doing some research related to last night's incident." Hughes approached, his eyes fixed on the closed book on the table. "I see. Did you find anything interesting?" For a moment, James considered confronting his old friend with what he had discovered, but something stopped him. "Nothing conclusive yet," he replied, keeping his tone neutral. Hughes nodded slowly. "Well, I'm sure that if anyone can solve this mystery, it's you, James." He paused, as if he were about to say something more, but then seemed to change his mind. "Good luck with your investigation." When Hughes left, James let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The seemingly casual conversation had been charged with unspoken tension. Returning to his office, James found himself facing an ethical dilemma. What should he do with this new information? Report it immediately to the palace authorities? Or investigate further before making accusations that could tarnish the reputation of a family that had served the crown for generations? As he pondered his options, James couldn't help but think of the ramifications of his actions. If the sapphire truly carried a curse, what would its disappearance mean? And if the Hughes family were behind it, would it be an act of long overdue justice or dangerous revenge. The weight of responsibility bore down on his shoulders. James knew that his next actions could change the course of palace history, and possibly the nation itself. Looking out the window at the gardens now bathed in the midday light, James wondered, how far would he be willing to go in search of the truth? And what would be the ultimate price of that quest? What would you do in James's place? Would you confront history and risk exposing centuries-old secrets? Or would you maintain the status quo, preserving peace at the cost of truth? James knew the answers to these questions could change everything, and the clock continued to tick relentlessly. Have you ever wondered how rumors spread in a place where the walls seem to have ears? How to discern truth amidst a sea of half-truths and speculation? As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the halls of Buckingham Palace, James Harford decided to broaden his investigation. He knew that in a place like this, the staff often knew more than they let on. James made his way to the kitchen, the palace's beating heart. The aroma of fresh bread and spices filled the air, mingling with the buzz of conversation and the clinking of pots and cutlery. "Attention, please," James called, his voice calm yet authoritative, immediately silencing the room. "As you all know, there was an incident last night. I need the cooperation of each of you. If you saw or heard anything unusual, no matter how small it may seem, please come speak to me privately." The exchanged glances among the staff did not escape James. There was something in the air, a palpable tension that went beyond the natural nervousness caused by the jewel's disappearance. After his announcement, James retreated to a small office adjacent to the kitchen. It didn't take long for the first person to knock on the door. "Come in," James called. A middle-aged woman, whom James recognized as Martha, one of the palace's longest-serving cooks, entered hesitantly. "Mr. Harford," she began, wringing her apron nervously in her hands. "I don't know if this is important, but—" "Any information could be crucial, Martha," James encouraged her gently. Martha took a deep breath before continuing. "Well, last night, just before dinner was served, I saw Mr. Hughes talking to a man I'd never seen before. They were in the back garden, speaking in low voices. It looked tense." James felt his heart race. "Did you manage to overhear anything they were saying?" Martha shook her head. "No, sir, but Mr. Hughes seemed agitated. And the stranger, he had a dangerous air, if you know what I mean." James nodded, absorbing the information. "Thank you, Martha. This could be very useful." Throughout the afternoon, James heard from several other staff members. Each account added a piece to the puzzle, but also raised new questions. A gardener mentioned seeing lights on in Lady Vivian's office late at night, days before the party. A maid spoke of whispered conversations between Lady Vivian and an unknown man in the corridors. As the sun set, casting increasingly long shadows over the palace, James found himself faced with a tangled web of conflicting information and growing suspicions. Back in his office, James began organizing the information he had collected. On a sheet of paper, he traced a web of connections linking names, events, and rumors. At the center of this web were three names: Lady Vivian, Henry Hughes, and the mysterious Sapphire. As he contemplated the diagram in front of him, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of something much larger than a simple jewel theft. There were layers of secrets and intrigue that extended far beyond the palace walls. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly covering his notes with other papers. To his surprise, it was Lady Vivian who entered, looking pale and agitated. "James," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to talk. There's something you need to know about the Sapphire." James stood up, gesturing to a chair for Lady Vivian. "Please, milady, sit. What do you have to tell me?" Lady Vivian hesitated for a moment before speaking, her eyes nervously scanning the room. "The Sapphire. It's not just a jewel. It carries a secret, one that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy if it came to light." James felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of secret, milady?" "A secret involving betrayal, lies, and a blood debt that was never paid," Lady Vivian replied, her voice almost a whisper. "And now I fear someone is determined to expose it all." As night fell over Buckingham Palace, James found himself at the epicenter of a storm threatening to unleash forces beyond his control. Lady Vivian's revelations promised to cast new light on everything he thought he knew. What would you do if you were in James's place? How could he navigate this sea of secrets and conflicting loyalties? And most importantly, whom could he really trust? As the shadows grew longer, James knew that the answers he sought could very well alter the course of history, and the price of truth could be higher than he had ever imagined. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to bear the weight of a secret capable of toppling a monarchy? How to balance loyalty to the institution with the pursuit of truth, knowing each step could lead to irreversible consequences? James's office was shrouded in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the soft glow of a lamp. Lady Vivian sat stiffly in the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea that James had offered her. "Please, milady," James said softly, "tell me everything about this secret." Lady Vivian took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on a distant point. The sapphire. It originally belonged to the Hughes family, as you may have discovered, but the story of how it came into the hands of the crown is far darker than the official records suggest. James leaned forward, hanging on her every word. In 1892, she continued, the king at the time was desperate. The country was facing an unprecedented financial crisis, and he feared a revolution. That's when he made a pact with the patriarch of the Hughes family. "What kind of pact?" James asked, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "Hughes was more than just a butler," Lady Vivian explained, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He had connections with less reputable elements of society. The king asked him to deal with certain opposition leaders who threatened to expose the precarious state of the royal treasury." James felt a shiver run down his spine. "Are you saying the king ordered assassinations?" Lady Vivian completed, her face pale in the dim light. "Yes, Hughes carried out his part of the deal. In return, he was promised a noble title and a permanent position of influence at court." "But something went wrong," James deduced. Lady Vivian nodded sadly. "The king betrayed Hughes. Instead of fulfilling his promise, he accused Hughes of treason, using the very actions he had ordered as evidence. The sapphire was confiscated as proof of the crime, and the Hughes family was disgraced." James leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning with the implications of these revelations. "And the curse?" "Hughes swore on his deathbed that the sapphire would bring misfortune to any member of the royal family who possessed it," Lady Vivian said, a tremor in her voice. "And over the years, there have been incidents, inexplicable accidents, sudden deaths, always involving whoever was in possession of the jewel." "And now it's gone," James murmured, more to himself than to Lady Vivian. "Exactly," she agreed. "And I fear that whoever stole it intends to use its secret to destroy the monarchy once and for all." James stood up, walking to the window. The full moon hung over the palace gardens, casting ghostly shadows. "Why are you telling me this now, milady?" Lady Vivian hesitated for a moment. "Because I believe you are the only one who can solve this, James. You have the trust of both the royal family and the staff. And more importantly, you have a sense of justice that transcends blind loyalties." James turned to face her. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Find the sapphire," she said, her eyes pleading. "But more than that, uncover the full truth. Perhaps it's time to right the wrongs of the past, no matter the cost." As Lady Vivian withdrew, leaving James alone with his swirling thoughts, he found himself facing a monumental dilemma. The truth he sought could very well be the same that would destroy the institution to which he had dedicated his life. James picked up the telephone, his fingers hovering over the numbers. He knew he needed help, but who could he trust with such explosive information? At that moment, an urgent knock sounded at the door. Before James could answer, it opened, revealing a breathless and visibly troubled Henry Hughes. "James," he gasped, "we need to talk. It's about the sapphire, and what really happened in 1892. The look in his old friend's eyes told James that the night was far from over, and that the revelations to come could change the course of history forever. What would you do in James's place? How could he navigate this minefield of historical secrets and conflicting loyalties? And most importantly, What would be the final price of truth? As the night wore on, James knew that the decisions he made in the coming hours could redefine not only his own fate, but the future of the British monarchy itself. James's office, once a haven of order and calm, now felt too small to contain the weight of the revelations accumulating within it. Henry Hughes, usually composed and reserved, was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he sat in the chair Lady Vivian had occupied moments before. "Henry," James began, his voice gentle but firm, "what do you know about 1892? Hughes closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. When he opened them again, there was a fierce determination in his gaze. "Everything, James, I know everything." In the hours that followed, Hughes unraveled a tapestry of family secrets, royal betrayals, and broken promises. He confirmed much of what Lady Vivian had revealed, but added details that painted an even darker picture. "My great-grandfather was more than just a butler," Hughes explained. "He was the keeper of royal secrets, the man behind the throne. When the king betrayed him, he didn't just disgrace our family. He disrupted a delicate system of checks and balances that kept the monarchy in line." James listened intently, his mind working to connect all the pieces. "And the sapphire?" Hughes smiled bitterly. "The sapphire is more than a jewel, James. It's a key to a vault containing documents that could not only expose past crimes, but also reveal secrets that would shake the current monarchy to its core." "Where is this vault?" James asked, feeling the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. "Hidden somewhere within the palace itself," Hughes replied. "My great-grandfather hid it before he was imprisoned, as a final act of defiance and precaution." James stood up, walking to the window. The moon was now high in the sky, bathing the gardens in an ethereal glow. "Why are you telling me this now, Henry?" Hughes sighed deeply. "Because the sapphire has been stolen, James. And I wasn't the one who took it. There are others who know the story, others who would seek to use these secrets for their own ends, and I fear they are closer than we realize." With Hughes's revelations still echoing in his mind, James decided it was time for more active investigation. Under the cover of night, he ventured into the palace gardens, his eyes alert for any suspicious movement. Then he saw it, two figures whispering near the ancient oak tree. Approaching silently, James recognized one of the voices. It was Charles, the palace's head of security. "It has to be tonight," Charles was saying urgently. "With the confusion from the theft, no one will notice our absence." The other figure, whom James couldn't identify, responded in an equally low tone, "And you're sure you know where to look?" "I have a map," Charles confirmed. "Passed down through my family for generations. Tonight, we finally right the wrongs of the past." James felt his heart race. Charles, a man he implicitly trusted, was involved in some sort of conspiracy. But was it to protect the crown or to expose it? As the two figures moved away, James made a decision. He would follow them, determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. James trailed Charles and his mysterious companion through the palace's lesser-used corridors. To his surprise, they headed to an area he barely recognized, an ancient part of the building rarely visited. Charles stopped in front of a faded tapestry, removing it to reveal a hidden door. With a furtive glance around, he inserted a key into the lock, and the door creaked open. James waited a few moments before following them, his heart pounding in his chest. The passage led to a labyrinth of underground tunnels, lit only by the dim glow of lanterns. As he advanced cautiously, James could hear distant echoes of voices and footsteps. The air was thick with the smell of mold and long-buried secrets. Suddenly, he heard a muffled cry, followed by the sound of a struggle. Running toward the commotion, James found himself in a circular chamber. In the center, Charles lay on the ground, motionless. Above him, the hooded figure held something that gleamed in the faint light. The sapphire. "Stop!" James shouted, stepping into the chamber. The figure turned, surprised, and James finally saw their face. It was Eleanor, the young maid. "Eleanor?" James asked, incredulous. "What is happening here?" Eleanor held the sapphire tightly, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "You don't understand, Mr. Harford. This is bigger than all of us." "Then explain it to me," James said, keeping his voice calm as he slowly approached. Eleanor hesitated, looking at Charles lying on the ground. He was going to destroy the evidence. Erase the history, we can't let that happen. What evidence? James asked, though he already suspected the answer. The documents, Eleanor replied, proof of the Crown's crimes, of the lies and betrayals. Charles was sent to destroy them, but I am a descendant of those who were betrayed. I can't let the truth be buried again. James looked at the sapphire in her hand. And the jewel. It's the key, Eleanor explained. The key to the vault where the documents are hidden. At that moment, Charles groaned, beginning to move. James knew he had only seconds to make a decision that could change the course of history. Eleanor, James said softly, give me the sapphire. The young woman hesitated, her eyes moving between James and the exit. Why? So you can give it back to the royal family? So the secrets remain buried? James took another step forward. No, so we can do the right thing. Together. For a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was Charles's heavy breathing. Then slowly, Eleanor extended her hand, offering the sapphire to James. As his fingers touched the jewel, James felt an immense weight, not just physical, but the weight of responsibility, of history, and of a nation's destiny. What will we do now? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling slightly. James looked at the sapphire, then at Charles, who was starting to rise, and finally at Eleanor. We're going to uncover the truth, all of it. And then we'll do whatever it takes to right the wrongs of the past. The air in the underground chamber was heavy, laden with centuries-old secrets. James, Eleanor, and Charles formed an unlikely trio, united by the quest for a truth that had remained hidden for so long. The faint glow of their lanterns danced on the stone walls, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. It's here, murmured Eleanor, her fingers tracing an almost imperceptible symbol on the wall. The Hughes family emblem. James stepped closer, examining the mark. It was a stylized eagle, so subtle that it could easily be mistaken for a natural imperfection in the stone. He raised the sapphire, which glowed with an inner light as if responding to the proximity of its destiny. How does it work? Asked Charles, his voice tense. The head of security was still visibly shaken by the night's events, torn between his duty to the crown and the truth about to be revealed. James took a deep breath. There's only one way to find out. Carefully, he pressed the sapphire against the eagle emblem. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low creak that echoed through the chamber, a section of the wall began to move, revealing a hidden opening. Eleanor gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. It worked after all this time. James reached into the secret compartment, his fingers finding an old leather-bound package. Reverently, he withdrew it, feeling the weight of history in his hands. We'll need more light, he said, turning to his companions. And a more suitable place to examine this. They decided to use James's office, a place that offered privacy and the necessary resources to analyze old documents. The tense journey back through the underground tunnels was tense, every shadow seeming to conceal potential threats to the secrets they carried. Once in the sanctuary of James's office, they gathered around his desk. Carefully, James untied the cords holding the package closed, revealing a collection of documents, some fragile with age, others surprisingly well preserved. My God, Charles whispered, as James began to unfold the first document. Is this real? The first paper was a letter, dated 1892, written by the king himself. In it, the plan to silence opposition leaders, using Hughes as his secret agent, was detailed. The language was clear and incriminating, leaving no doubt as to the nature of the royal orders. Eleanor, reading over James's shoulder, let out a shaky sigh. So it's true, all of it. The betrayal, the deaths, all ordered by the throne. James nodded gravely, moving on to the next document. It was a detailed record of Hughes's actions, including names, dates, and methods. The reading was disturbing, revealing a web of intrigue and assassinations that stretched far beyond what any of them had imagined. There's more, said James, his voice hoarse as he continued to examine the papers. Secret agreements with foreign powers, manipulation of elections. It seems the Crown's influence extended far beyond what the public ever knew. Charles, who had remained silent until then, finally espy. Centuries of history, of tradition, all down the drain. James looked up from the documents, his gaze meeting Charles's. Or it could be an opportunity for redemption, to finally correct the wrongs of the past and build a future based on truth. Eleanor, who had been examining another set of papers, suddenly gasped. "James, look at this." She pushed a document toward him. "It's a list of families. Families affected by the Crown's actions, including mine." James examined the list, recognizing several names of families who still served at the palace, apparently unaware of the role the monarchy had played in their past. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling slightly. James looked at the sapphire resting on the table, its soft glow seeming to pulse with the energy of the secrets revealed. Then, he turned to his companions, his expression determined. "Now," he said, "we do what's right. We take this to the Queen. It's time for the monarchy to face its past and decide what kind of future it wants to build." Charles paled. "You can't be serious. This is treason." "No, Charles," James replied calmly. "Treason would be hiding the truth. What we're doing is giving the Crown a chance to redeem itself." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and determination. "I'm with you, James. It's time for the truth to come out." As the night wore on, the three continued to examine the documents, each revelation adding a new layer to the complex tapestry of secrets and lies that had shaped the nation's history. James knew that the decisions they would make in the coming hours could change the course of British history forever. And so, with the weight of history in their hands and the responsibility of the future on their shoulders, they prepared to face the greatest challenge of their lives, presenting the truth to the Queen herself. Morning arrived at Buckingham Palace with a palpable tension in the air. James, Eleanor, and Charles had stayed up all night, preparing for what might be the most crucial moment of their lives. James's office, normally a sanctuary of order and calm, now looked like a battlefield with documents scattered around and empty coffee cups testifying to their sleepless vigil. "It's time," said James, adjusting his tie in the window's reflection. The rising sun cast a golden glow over the palace gardens, a beauty starkly contrasting with the storm about to be unleashed. Eleanor, pale but determined, nodded. "I'm ready." Charles, on the other hand, seemed to be fighting an internal battle. "I still think we should reconsider. The impact of continuing to hide the truth would be far worse," James interrupted, his voice firm yet gentle. "Charles, you've seen the documents. You know what's at stake." The head of security sighed heavily, running a hand over his tired face. "I know, it's just, my whole life has been dedicated to protecting the Crown. And now you have the chance to protect it in an even more important way," Eleanor added, placing a comforting hand on Charles's shoulder. James picked up the folder containing the most crucial documents and the sapphire. "Let's go. The Queen is waiting for us." The walk to the Queen's private chambers seemed endless. Each step echoed down the ornate corridors. Each look from palace staff seemed charged with suspicion. Or perhaps it was just the trio's heavy conscience projecting their fear. Finally, they reached the royal antechamber. The Queen's private secretary, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, greeted them with a curious look. "Her Majesty awaits you," he announced, opening the ornate doors. The Queen stood by the window, looking out at the gardens. At the sound of the doors opening, she turned, her face a mask of royal composure. Years of training and experience had given her the ability to hide her emotions, but James noticed a subtle tension in her eyes. "Mr. Harford," she greeted, her gaze briefly passing over Eleanor and Charles. "I understand you have something urgent to discuss with me." James bowed respectfully. "Yes, Your Majesty. What we have to present is extremely delicate and of utmost importance to the Crown." The Queen nodded, indicating they should sit. "Proceed then." With a quick glance at his companions, James began to lay out his findings. He spoke about the Sapphire's history, the betrayal of the Hughes family, and the crimes committed in the name of the Crown. As he presented the documents, the Queen's expression remained impassive, but her eyes betrayed a storm of emotions. Eleanor and Charles occasionally added details, their voices trembling slightly under the weight of the moment. When James finally finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. The Queen slowly stood up, walking to the window again. For long moments she remained there, seemingly lost in thought. Finally she turned to face them. "Mr. Harford," she began, her voice calm but laden with emotion, "do you understand the implications of what you are proposing?" James inclined his head respectfully. "Yes, Your Majesty. I believe it's time for the monarchy to face its past and make peace with it. The path won't be easy, but it's necessary." Eleanor, summoning her courage, added, "Your Majesty, the families affected by these actions of the past deserve justice and recognition, including my own." The Queen turned to her, her expression softening slightly. "And you, young lady, what do you suggest we do?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I believe that the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to healing and progress." Charles, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, as head of security, my duty has always been to protect the crown. But now I see that the greatest threat comes from within, from the secrets we carry. I support the decision to face this truth, no matter how difficult it may be." The Queen observed them for another moment, then walked to an old desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and removed a small object, an ancient key. "This key," she said, her voice low but firm, "has been passed down from monarch to monarch for generations. It opens a vault containing the crown's deepest secrets. I have always wondered if the day would come when its contents would come to light." She turned to James, extending the key. "Mr. Harford, you have proven to be not only loyal to the crown, but to truth and justice. I entrust you with the task of opening this vault and determining which truths must be revealed to the public." James accepted the key with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the responsibility it represented. "The path will not be easy," continued the Queen. "There will be those who oppose it, who say we are destroying centuries of tradition. But perhaps it is time to build new traditions, based on honesty and accountability." She straightened, her posture regaining royal strength. "You have my authorization to proceed. Prepare a detailed plan for how we will approach this publicly. I want to be fully informed before we take the next step." As James, Eleanor, and Charles prepared to leave, the Queen stopped them with one last comment. "Mr. Harford," she called, a slight smile touching her lips. "It seems that the true jewel of the palace was not the sapphire after all, but the integrity of those who serve it." With those words echoing in their ears, the trio left the royal chambers, aware that they had just taken the first step on a journey that would change the course of British history forever. In the weeks following the meeting with the Queen, Buckingham Palace became a hive of frenetic activity. James, Eleanor, and Charles worked tirelessly, preparing documents, consulting historians and public relations experts, and crafting a meticulous plan to reveal the truth to the public. James's office, once a refuge of tranquility, now looked more like a war room. Historical maps covered the walls, detailed timelines stretched across improvised tables, and piles of documents threatened to topple at any moment. "James," Eleanor called, looking up from a report she was reviewing, "do you realize we're about to rewrite nearly 2 centuries of British history?" James nodded gravely, rubbing his temples. The weight of responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming. "That's why we need to be absolutely certain of every detail before we go public." Charles entered the room, carrying a fresh stack of newspapers. "Speculation is mounting," he informed them, spreading the headlines across the table. "It seems some rumors have begun to leak." James scanned the sensationalist titles. "Royal secrets about to be revealed." "Scandal at the palace. What is the crown hiding?" "Anonymous sources suggest shocking revelations about the monarchy's past." "We expected how we couldn't keep this secret forever. The question now is controlling the narrative." At that moment, the phone rang. It was the Queen's private secretary summoning them to an emergency meeting. When they arrived at the royal quarters, they found not only the Queen but also the Prime Minister and several high-ranking advisors. The tension in the air was palpable. "Mr. Harford," began the Queen, her voice firm despite the evident concern in her eyes, "it seems our hand has been forced." Speculation is becoming uncontrollable. We need to act now. The Prime Minister, a middle-aged man with greying hair and a penetrating gaze, interjected, "Your Majesty, with all due respect, I still believe we should reconsider. The political implications of such revelations could be catastrophic." James stepped forward. "Prime Minister, I understand your concerns, but I firmly believe that honesty is our best policy at this moment. If we don't control the narrative, others will do it for us." Arguments were presented from all sides, with the future of the monarchy and the stability of the country weighing on every word. Finally, after hours of debate, the Queen raised her hand, silencing everyone. "The time has come," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of royal tradition. "We will make a public announcement. The Crown will acknowledge past mistakes and commit to making reparations." In the days that followed, an unprecedented media storm descended on the palace. The Queen, in a televised speech to millions, revealed the truth about the monarchy's past, acknowledging the mistakes made and promising a new era of transparency and accountability. James, Eleanor, and Charles were praised by many for their integrity and courage, but they also faced fierce criticism from more conservative sectors of society who saw them as traitors to the institution they had sworn to serve. Lady Vivian, in an exclusive interview with one of the country's leading newspapers, revealed her own connection to the Sapphire's story. "For generations we carried the weight of this secret," she confessed, tears in her eyes. "It's a relief to finally be able to speak the truth." Public reactions varied dramatically. Protests erupted across the country, some in support of the Queen's decision, others condemning what they saw as a betrayal of British tradition. Amidst the tumult, James Risset, it was Henry Hughes, his voice choked with emotion. "James," he said, "my great-grandfather, he can finally rest in peace. Thank you for righting the wrongs of the past." As night fell over a restless London, James found himself alone in his office, contemplating the sapphire now resting in a glass case on his desk. The jewel's gleam seemed different now, as if the weight of the secrets it carried had finally been lifted. Eleanor entered quietly, placing a cup of tea beside James. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. James let out a long sigh. "Relieved, frightened, hopeful, all at once. And you?" Eleanor smiled wistfully. "The same. But you know what? Despite all the chaos, I feel like we're finally on the right path." James nodded, picking up his cup of tea. The path to redemption is never easy, but it's necessary. While the city outside continued in turmoil, inside the palace a new era was just beginning. An era of honesty, of facing the past, and of hope for the future. The months following the public revelations were a roller coaster of emotions and events for everyone involved. Buckingham Palace, once a symbol of unchanging tradition and power, now found itself at the center of an unprecedented transformation. Sir James Harford, still adjusting to the title, was in his office, now located in a more central wing of the palace. The walls, once adorned with old paintings, now displayed a mix of traditional and contemporary art, symbolizing the fusion of old and new that the monarchy was embracing. He picked up the sapphire, now returned to the palace, as a symbol of reconciliation after its public display, and observed it in the light of the lamp. His fingers traced the jewel's facets, recalling the extraordinary journey it had set in motion. A gentle knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Eleanor entered, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. Now serving as the Director of Transparency and Public Relations, she had become a respected figure, both inside and outside the palace. "I thought you could use a break," she said, setting the tray on the desk. "You've been working tirelessly on the Queen's speech preparations for Parliament." James smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Eleanor. How are things in your department?" Eleanor sat down, pouring tea for both of them. "Surprisingly well. The public has responded positively to our transparency initiatives. The guided tours of the Royal Archives are an absolute hit." James nodded, taking a sip of tea. "And Charles, how is he adapting to his new role?" "Better than we expected," Eleanor replied with a, "Who would have thought our former head of security would become such a staunch advocate for openness and accountability?" They laughed together, reminiscing about the journey that had brought them here. The silence that followed was comfortable, laden with shared memories and challenges overcome. "You know, Eleanor," James said thoughtfully, spinning the sapphire between his fingers, "sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing, if the price of truth wasn't too high." Eleanor studied him for a, "James, look at what we've accomplished. The monarchy, which many thought was on the brink of collapse, is now seen as a model of reform and adaptation. The families wronged in the past are receiving justice and recognition, and most importantly, we've set a precedent for honesty and responsibility that goes far beyond these palace walls." James smiled, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right, of course. It's just that sometimes the weight of responsibility feels overwhelming. That's why we don't carry it alone," Eleanor replied softly. "We're a team, remember?" At that moment, the door opened again, and Charles entered, followed by the Queen. James and Eleanor immediately stood, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Please sit," the Queen said with a warm smile. "I came to thank you personally for the exceptional work you've done. The speech for Parliament is perfect, Sir James." "Thank you, Your Majesty," James replied, bowing respectfully. The Queen approached, her gaze settling on the sapphire James still held. "Ah, our old friend," she said, a hint of nostalgia in her voice. "Who would have thought a jewel could trigger so much change?" "In fact, Your Majesty," Charles interjected, "it wasn't the jewel itself, but the people in this room who had the courage to face the truth it represented." The Queen nodded, her gaze sweeping over James, Eleanor, and Charles. "The three of you turned a potential catastrophe into a rebirth for the monarchy. I have no words to express my gratitude." James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "It was an honor to serve the crown and the country, Your Majesty." "And it will continue to be," the Queen added with a smile. "We have much work ahead. The journey to build a truly modern and transparent monarchy is only beginning." As the Queen prepared to leave, she paused, looking once more at the sapphire. "Perhaps," she said thoughtfully, "it's time to give this jewel a new purpose, something that symbolizes our new era of transparency and responsibility." James nodded, an idea forming in his mind. "Perhaps we could use it as a symbol of a new annual award, Your Majesty, a recognition for those who demonstrate exceptional integrity and public service." The Queen smiled broadly. "An excellent idea, Sir James. Work on it and present me with a proposal." After the Queen's departure, James, Eleanor, and Charles remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything that had happened. "Well," Charles finally spoke, a smile playing on his lips, "it seems our adventure is far from over." Eleanor laughed softly. "Did we ever doubt that?" James looked at his friends and colleagues, feeling a surge of gratitude and pride. "No," he said, raising his teacup in an impromptu toast, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." As the sun set over London, casting a golden glow through the palace windows, the three friends toasted to the future, a future they had helped shape with courage, integrity, and an unwavering belief in the power of truth. The sapphire glowed softly on the table between them, no longer a symbol of secrets and curses, but a reminder of the transformative power of honesty and the courage to face the past in order to build a better future. And so, in the heart of Buckingham Palace, a new era continued to unfold, an era of transparency, reconciliation, and hope. An era that James, Eleanor, and Charles had helped create, and now had the honor of continuing to build, one day at a time.